Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live stream. How does the mind animate itself? A question which, in some sense, has been asked by every curious human being. We cannot avoid how every human being is starting from their domain of awareness and acknowledgement. In ancient times, it was a sort of animated symbol that the soul has left the body. When we go look at the derivation of the word soul in many traditions, it comes from the word breath. And so pretty much it's as if when the breath of a person left, when you saw a person take their last breath, to many people it seemed as if the soul left the body in some sense. In yoga, the breathing is very important. There is a notion of a subtler life force that is made sensitive to through breathing practice. However, what really animates the intelligence of a human being is in a position where either it is being attributed to an individual intelligence or a collective intelligence, either free will is coloring the world into meaning, or in some sense the will of the universal sector surpasses the individual's assumptions. So what that means is there's one way of seeing how the mind has animated in your experience, and then there's another way of seeing how the quality of the mind or the intelligence of the being that is animated will be seen to be an extension. To kind of summarize my perspective, I consider a world where there was no consciousness. I consider a world where there was no identity or momentary attention to a sort of form that could own phenomena. Life was in some sense an occurrence, simple as that. It was just this grand happening. In this grand happening, from this unconscious vast movement of nature, there originated a sort of individual conscious reality. So man, in some sense, considers that we are oscillating, especially when you want to look at it from maybe as the sophistication of a Jungian analyst. From the collective unconscious came the collective conscious, came the individual conscious entity. Now, from the individual conscious entity, is again coming a sort of collective unconscious intelligence. The title, How the Mind Animates Itself, could be another way of saying how attention is moving intelligence. Nature has an intelligence to it. We are at the front lines of this intelligence. After 4 billion years of an evolutionary process, we find ourselves in a position where the sense of self is extending in depth and dimension as more is seen. So as more comes in the conscious attention of the being, as the person can acknowledge more data, there is in some sense more depth to the same phenomena. So what that means is, like, for example, I've ran like close to 28 laps around the sun. And in doing so, it's an implication of the waves of data that are exposed to the individual. And so, the more I live in this world through my waking state, the more meaning there can be in it. You see, the sophistication of the meaning you see in yourself has to do with the dimensions you see in your world. So if I consider on the world only objective, there is no room, as if the filter is so unique that objectivity holds claim to reality. Now, the issue is that language has developed and brain chemistry has led to a unique sort of hallucination, at least from a secular scientific viewpoint. We are the hallucination of chemicals. Pretty much stardust is hallucinating that it is a human. The notion of an electron leading towards a mind, it's as if there's a sophistication of design. Now, we tend to see design as something that is physically here, okay? But there are ways that I consider that there are intelligent fields that they plant it's as if there's a level to our, this is my personal, of course, view. There's a level to existence where it's the outline level. It's the outline dimension. What that means is, like right now, many of the thoughts that I have, for example, to the listener, they make appear as just out of nowhere. But when my attention truly goes internal, it begins to wonder about the origin. When it wonders about the origin, it taps into a subtlety of various frameworks that the world is kept in. So you can say the process of conscious evolution is not to just reach a point and have good enough beliefs to go with the program. It is in some sense the evolution of the belief itself, and which in some sense implying that this how the mind animates itself, in some sense it contains itself through sensory perception. There's a sentence in the Rig Vedas that says the mind is a slave to the real. So what that means is the mind is animating itself in what it considers to be real. There is a sort of gravitation towards the continuity of what is real. I looked at evolution. I was like, what is this? What is evolution? And do you know what conclusion I came to? I came to a very profound conclusion that it is the eternal urge and effort of a temporary creature to continue. That means whether you like it or not, when the human being is cornered, it will fight. You know, it's as if there's a blessing in our animalistic nature. It makes us handle a lot of shit that goes on in this planet, in this universal cycle. I find that there's this imagery, and often it comes to me on not that often, but this idea has visited me a couple times in this lifetime. And the idea is the notion that it's as if the sheep are being guided to a slaughterhouse, yet the sheep cannot question the system that is guiding them. And so I find a similar system to exist conceptually. You see, we have the notion of, for example, people stealing. Okay, we see the notion of like someone taking something. Okay, you know, the sort of Abrahamic sin of theft. Now, imagine someone stole the attention of a person's life. Idol worship, like 2000, like 2000 years ago, even more further, we went from a sort of worshipping of phenomena. Think of it this way: the Abrahamic religions, at least in an Islamic context, many Muslims, when they pray, pretty much all Muslims, when they pray, their attention goes to Mecca. It's a holy pilgrimage location. And Mecca, there is the Kaaba, this building, black structure, I mean, with the black cloth on it. And this building, its significance was that it was the house of the gods, of that people worship, like various idols. And so there's the notion of Ibrahim, in some sense, one day coming and seeing these people worshiping these idols, and one day they're gone. He breaks all the idols except one. The people come back, and they suddenly see Ibrahim like beside a hammer and beside one of the idols. And so they look at Abraham and they're like, Abraham, did you do this? Did you break our gods? You know, and Abraham is like, no, this one God did it. And obviously, Abraham broke the gods, you know. But he said this one God did it. And suddenly the people were not convinced. They're like, this God doesn't have hands and legs to kind of break the other statues. And so, in some sense, Abraham kind of gave a moment of self-reflection. It's like, how is this then God? You see, so there was a notion of where truth was being localized through the attention of the human being. It was first being kind of self-reflectively comprehended in objectivity. Then it moved to subjectivity, and that's where we are. That's the unique thing. The era of idea worship not only began after idols were broken, but in some sense, it is continuing. There is so much ideal worship going on. And so this is the challenge of the human being. It is not to just follow its cultural program. If you do, you never have a chance to do anything. Like, let me say it like this. It's as if Noam Chomsky has this incredible comment. I don't remember it verbatim, but the idea follows that it's as if the educational system puts the student in debt. Okay? And because the student is in debt, it has to follow the system. So in some sense, it is a sort of kind of the road you choose takes you kind of where the road leads. What that means is that the child is too sculpted at the end of the process of paying its debt, that it is in some sense forced to go work in the system. Now the thing is, this is the opportunity cost, guys. This has always occurred, okay? It has to do with a sort of technological view on certain situations that are occurring for the civilization, for humanity. First thing is, if the inventor of a technology wants to use that technology to experiment, to in some sense see how it is, it cannot invent in the moment that it is trying it out. And so there are certain systems and institutions that rather than updating, they just want to continue their existence in a certain mode. It can be said that, especially when a program comes into a new program comes into existence, that program wants to see the influence of the environment in regards to it. Do you see? So in some sense, the change is reduced because it's like the technology wants, we want to see how like we build a car and we want to take it for a drive, and because we're taking it for a drive, the car is not in the, like, engineering studio constantly being updated and whatnot. So what I'm telling you is that we innovated to some degree and then stopped. And then certain firm systems began, that these systems are so intense that they inevitably unconsciously govern the being. What that means is, it's like you find a bouquet of roses and you can smell them, but if you're standing beside a dumpster, the smell of the dumpster will be there too. It doesn't matter how many roses you have in your hand. It doesn't matter how close you take your nose to the pedal. It's as if the environment, the efficiency is echoing in the environment. Now, the efficiency there's an issue, because children on this planet are kind of torn. They're like, should I follow the program before me, or should I go start a new program? You know? And all children have a decision to make, all living beings in some degree, is that do they want the past to define their future, or do they want their future to define their past? And those are two different mindsets, two different ambitions, two different sorts of ethics and responsibility arise for the human being in those mindsets. So how the mind animates itself, well, because we see that our existence is conditional, we at first think that it's certain unique conditions that are leading to how the mind or the intelligence of the human being is animating itself. So pretty much, it's like I've asked, this is still one of, like, I think for a while it's going to remain as one of my deep questions that I'm still wondering about. But I have a sort of my own personal certainty, but I'm still trying to see other angles of the idea. And it's this notion that, does free will exist? Because, guys, I looked into philosophy. Philosophy is a telescope for the wise. And so I looked into philosophy, and I looked as far as I could towards the edge of my conceivable reality. I discovered something profound. I discovered that language was replacing my free will. That freedom does not have per se a definition, because it is the most open response to change. You see, when you stay the same but the world around you changes, you automatically feel as if there's a lack of freedom. For most people, when they study karma and they wonder about their karmic result, it has to do with their freedom. And so any expectation, see, the child enters this world being dependent on the conditions. So I'll be honest, that just they like it's not just even me saying it. It's like there's a saying, I think it's in Indian culture, where they say your parents are like your first gods. So in some sense, the child has nothing else but to trust what is keeping it alive, in some sense, like a newborn baby or something. You see, there's a dependence that arises in the child's mind. This is why some psychologists say, by it's like not until the age of 14 or something where the child begins to actually individualize itself. Because if you're not an individual, you in some sense are still you don't exist in some sense. Okay? Now, mysticism is a very unique domain, because if the person has not studied the individuality of their lifetime, how their conscious attention throughout the moment orchestrates itself as an individual entity, if they don't study that and they suddenly just dive into the collective notions and metaphysics and whatnot, it's not going to be meaningful. Because you see, it's an experiential alignment, kind of like the water of the kettle has to boil. It doesn't matter how much you theorize or whatever, and on some level, it doesn't matter what temperature you put the thing. Eventually, it will boil if there's heat. If there's continuous effort, then truth cannot be hidden. You know. And so here's the challenge, that in studying how our mind animates itself, we cannot avoid how the world is animating itself. So that question, one of those deep questions was, is there free will in a world where it seems there are so many, it's like universal laws are holding this box of reality? I find that in any branch of knowledge you can meet the unknown, because similar to how you can see the space between the branches of a tree, there are unknown dimensions to every moment, you know? Sometimes when I give these talks, for me, the talk is not interesting if there is not a novelty factor to it. They see a thought of themselves looking through their eyes. Some people look in the mirror, and how the moment is present is too instantaneous to even have a definition. The subjectivity of time has in some sense been chaotic to many people. Anything, think of it this way. It's like one day realizing the world you see is not the world you see, because the sense of self that is seeing that world is changing. It's like, who could name change? Now, after 2011, in my life, some very profound experiences occurred, and I kind of dived into a sort of, I started comprehending the sort of deeper implication of all sorts of meditative practice. Simply because I had a sort of preferenceless approach. That means it's like I didn't care enough to believe in something. Because I didn't care enough to believe in something, it was as if like I was just being a moment. And when you're just being a moment, that's when suddenly you become sensitive of certain things. Since my childhood, it's just been something I just remember. It's kind of like how my eyes have opened to this world. It's as if since childhood, when people would come and speak, any moment in my life, even till now, there has been, I have acknowledged, it's just been there since childhood. I've acknowledged there is some intelligence that is unknown to itself. What that means is, for some people, a divine reality might mean, again, the Jungian sort of synchronicity. But for Mr. Within, a divine reality does not mean it's a conceptual one. It has to do with the sensitivity of how you as a being, as a moment of being, are administering the attention. Now you administer your attention in two ways. One in the objective realm, physically, and then the other is subjectively. Now the subjectivity is a strange situation, because it's like your thoughts are occurring where at the intersection of your memory and imagination. And the difference between memory and imagination is that memories are experiences, are like snapshots of experiences in the data, in the database of your intelligence. Okay? The human being is a sort of like our intelligence is a sort of processing of data. However, this data is processed differently and in some sense goes two directions. So everything you have ever seen, anything your sensory perception, when I say sensory perception, it means your five senses. Anything your five senses for now, till now, have received from this world, They are just reflections of the unique processing that they have gone through. You see, the novice seeker wants truth to be an outside condition because the internal reality is either too instant or too infinite. There's something about simultaneity that holds within it infinity. For example, if you were to envision infinite parallel realities, a sort of theory entertained in scientific circles, when we wonder about different parallel realities, like in one parallel reality, I'm saying something like this, and in another parallel reality, imagine I'm saying something else. These parallel realities imply a simultaneity of existence. So anytime a being adds a dimension to their reality, they have to acknowledge the presence of it, right? And so human beings are like 8 billion, it's either 8 billion human beings in one world or 8 billion human beings who are in their own world seeing the one world, seeing the one world in their own way. This has an incredible value that's untapped by the civilization because we haven't had that collective efficiency. You look at many other species, you see, for example, in some sense, wolves running together. You see lions have their pride. You see, in some sense, fish swim, a school of fish, go to school together. You see birds fly in the sky together. These are all implications that a species is actually like the broken pieces of one mirror. We will eventually realize what is humanity and what is all the living phenomena in this plane is actually the roots of the intelligence of of the most intelligent phenomena in this dimension are in the unknown. What that means is there is a veil to reality. This veil is generated based on the subjective limits you have on your sensory perception. Stories generate identity. And when stories can change and new stories can emerge, that is simply where the excitement of the human being is. What that means, guys, Buddha realized something incredibly important to the nature of thought. And what Buddha realized was the nature of emptiness of objective phenomena. This was one of those things, guys. I'll tell you, sometimes I've suddenly read certain things that happened in history, and I've just slow hand clapped. I was alone, just slow hand clapped for that historic moment, you know, because little did the Buddha know that more than 2,000 years from the time that he was alive, people will look at his reality, look at how he lived, and they would suddenly realize that when the Buddha said the nature of objective phenomena is empty, he meant literally somebody could put a cup of tea here, let's say warm tea, and you're looking at this warm tea and someone sees iced tea there, someone sees it like a hot, like relatively warm tea, let's say it doesn't have steam. So what I'm saying is, like, one objective phenomena based on the attention of the various individuals, it's as if the attention of each individual colors their reality into meaning. So in some sense, our attention animates our life and our life story. And so how your attention moves on like in this world is very important. It is incredibly important. It is like the only thing that you have to pay attention to, how your attention is being the moment. There is in some sense no greater teaching after that. So here's the thing. You can say the mind exists in known ways and unknown ways. Hence, the experiencer in the moment knows some things and doesn't know some things. Most people, once they know something, they specialize in it. They find an opening and they just keep going to see where it leads. Now, some people, they become aware of you. You see, this is the important thing about, even you can say, marital relationships and just any sort of kind of relationship dynamic, where that person you have fallen in love with, you better really love that person, because if the moment you're married, it's as if that person is a pillar in your attention. Do you see? And unless you have the same amount of care you have for yourself if you have for another, then it's as if there is a sort of bridge that the as traditional sayings on marriage would say, it's like when the person gets married, the person's two eyes become four eyes. You know, the person's two ears become four ears. And a sort of a relationship is like playfully a sort of collective, two beings in one moment, two eyes that see the same thing with the same value. What's interesting is that in Italian, the word anima, A-N-I-M-A, translates into soul. And so you can say the soul is that animative force in the moment where there was an attention to even see it. You see, there is such magnificence to existential design that just its unknown aspects are the inspirations of a lifetime. The fact that even Carl Jung found a way to map, like Carl Jung did some incredible stuff. It's kind of like one of those things. One of my side hobbies is, in some sense, finding some quiet time and a pleasant space, and to, in some sense, just dive into various ways that human beings have thought on this planet. And so far, what I have kind of concluded is that wisdom's ultimate position is to live for what is here. And ignorance's ultimate position is not to change in a changing world. And so this is where Mr. Within is saying, every human being that is alive right now, little do they know that thoughts are passing through their attention rather than them being a certain thought, being a certain person. We do not embrace our change. We are avoiding nature, because if we truly acknowledge nature, the chaos and order which should be equally valued. Do you see? That means a sort of reversion back into nature. There's two ways. It's as if, like, we don't want to return back to nature like animals. It's as if we are the children of Gaia who kind of went to live in an unnatural environment for a while, and then when we return, suddenly the intelligence moves differently. There was something about the Native American kind of metaphysical kind of ideology that I really adored. Like, it was something where, since my childhood, the spirit of nature, it was like, I was like, whoa, what could be more cooler than that? Right? And some people would say, it's the spirit of nature. What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, does the spirit of nature have a shape? Is it individual? Da 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 da. And you'd see, no. Sometimes the most divine thing is not something you find, it is something you notice. And sometimes the greatest self realizations are just an awareness of how the self is being here. You see, we've passed that era. This is why Mr. Within is like in some sort of playful war with language. I consider ideology. It's like the species is under attack. It is under attack by ideas. These ideas can rule the being. You know, imagine we have the greatest guitar player in the world, but this guitar player is stuck being a baker. And for 20 years, he's a baker, but on the side, he practices guitar, but he's a baker. You know, and suddenly one day, he finds like the America's Got Talent or something, and he goes there, and suddenly his nature, he wonders why in those 20 years he never tried. It is because the thought overpowers the novel attention, like the prime mover. Okay, when this is why Mr. Within says, at least in the perception that I acknowledge reality, consciousness is stillness and silence, and noise and movement is what is reality. That what I mean by that is that there's an attributeless nature to your attention, but because you were raised by the nature of your design, like the child is dependent on its environment, it still expects the world to listen to its mind. I was like, when people were praying for things, I was like, what are these people praying for? Do you see? And I realized that it was as if we want to evolve. It's like consciousness brings with it the burden of having to see the design go through. Okay? We have to live this life, and we are conscious of it. And we could have been like other species where, like, the animal's just in its natural habitat, it doesn't care about technology, progress, greatness of the human species, it doesn't care. You know, if we were an inferior species, we wouldn't care about our mortality, so we would do nothing about it. We wouldn't care. And so this is the implication that the main difference, what really distinguishes a human being from an animal, is the awareness of mortality. The fact that you are the actor, or you are the elemental forces of this universal sector, being a sort of actor of your own free will. It's as if it took us 4 billion years for this science project to get here. And after 4 billion years, what should be done with conscious entities in one moment? There's the story of this raindrop. This raindrop suddenly opened its eyes, and it was falling from the heavens down. It was falling down from the heavens. And this raindrop looked at the heavens and said, "Oh gods of existence, why have I fallen? Why have I fallen?" And so, as this individual drop is there and there's no answer coming, it's pure silence, this individual drop is like, what is the point of life? What is the point of life when I'm just falling in this world? You know? And when I say fall, it's interesting to take in the notion of the Abrahamic conception of the nature of the being, that it was a mistake to exist in this way. But anyways, so the thing is, the drop is falling, and the drop is freaking out. And suddenly, at the end of its life, the drop realizes it was falling into the ocean. In some sense, we are just a transit of known intelligence, intelligence that can know itself. Then it navigates, you know? For me, I I concluded a playful approach to reality is the only solution. Let me tell you why. Because regardless of how much you seek the most perfect order, the moment you find that perfect order, it will create in your subconscious the design of the perfect chaos. You become playful with reality because all knowledge has been created on a rock in the middle of nowhere. You see, when I see the atheist on YouTube videos kind of like destroy this theist, you know, by saying in some sense the notion of God is man-made, there is something very significant in that statement because everything is man-made. Do you see? In man's mind, everything is man-made. And because everything is man-made, there comes the question, what made man? Which then could make. We are allowing the relationship of reality's design to filter and limit our ability to accept what is going on only through certain narratives. I'm honestly in a love and hate relationship with language. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. That is a sentence of beautiful architecture in my mind. And the notion is that what is beyond the linguistic reality? Why are thoughts here? That means it's kind of like the purpose of objective evolution was to lead to a sort of subjective individual selfhood. This subjective individual selfhood is strange because it's like evolution evolved to be a thought. And so we are thinking that we are in some sense like the brain is just a limited projector and then the projector breaks. But it's kind of strange because the evolutionary kind of reaction of like how the universal sector seems to be changing, it seems to be changing into trying to lead towards designs where there is a sort of subjective self-awareness. Man is at the intersection of thought and matter. We are in a very unique state because our awareness of ourself gives us a sense that we are the ruler of the world. And for me, this is the thing about power too. Power has to be brought in because power is another way. It's like many people want to get rich for many reasons. Some want to hide in their own cave. Some people want to, in some sense, control the caves of others. Regardless of the ambition, the attention to value, once comprehended, that experientially changes. Like this is something where it's easy to look in the mirror and be comfortable with what you see. That's you in the mirror, you know? But to be comfortable with how the presence of your waking moment of being is in some sense leading to the animation of an identity. The circumstances are not just too unique for this design, but at the same time, you put man in a room and he will seek to go outside that room. The moment we made the world into a container, we wanted to see beyond it. And so we have to see where complexity comes from, and it's very simple. It comes from the simple. Simplicity, um, oh man, Da Vinci had this quote. Let me find it. Yeah, this is the quote. Da Vinci says, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So think of it this way: if simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, what the hell are all these people doing seeking complex ideologies to get enlightened in India? For not in India, but like in the New Age community. You see, the world cannot let go of its obsession for stories. This is why the first task of the human being should not be to save the world. It should be to locate an honest world they can live in. You have to trust the intelligence that is here, or you can't use it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you got to trust the roller coaster ride, or you'll never get on it. So this trust is very crucial. This trust doesn't mean it has to be faith to some idea that is the definer of the world. I'm saying it is an acknowledgement of the unknown. The religions did something incredible which the secular society does not comprehend. And what they did is they made a shelter, a bunker for the unknown to exist in man's mind in a personal relationship. Religions preserved a personal relationship with an unknown. They kept this some sort of story which in people's minds animated differently, which eventually led to a common ethos. This common ethos, like the inspiration of the community, it eventually became every person's personal relationship with the unknown, but together everybody is in the unknown. And so that was another way of saying it's like everything's the will of God. It's as if there was just. So for me, the thing is, here's the strange thing: the environment defines the limits of the ability. Sometimes it's not that the person is limited. Sometimes a person could have incredible ideas, but they could not have the right stage. I remember right now I'm very comfortable with communicating and speaking, but when I was like younger, when I was in like grade 10, I I had like we had this writing class. It was what was it called? Anyways, I had to go present in front of the whole class Dante's Inferno and something about Dante's Inferno. And the teacher wasn't there, so there was somebody who had brought a camera so my presentation could get recorded for the teacher. And so I was very shy, and playfully I remember I would just like drink from like there was this bottle of water I had. I would drink a little bit, put it down, and then drink it again, and then put it down, like to kind of have the time go forward. But back then I was kind of, eventually I gave the presentation, but I'm saying there was a sort of, I couldn't accept other ways of myself existing because I felt others could not. So there was a sort of subconscious enslavement to the world's, what I thought the world saw, you know? But the profound thing is you realize it's your eyes that are considering it. And sometimes it's as if the person assumes something and never double checks, and that assumption goes into the subconscious as a sort of belief. This is why I'm saying the person is not a thought. You're not a thought. You're a sort of like present attributeless attention. This is the clearest way to navigate. their future incarnation. You see, in Buddhist thought and Eastern mysticism, they entertain a notion that the consciousness of the being, or whatever you like to consider, uh, the soul, or whatever terminology you want to use, there's this continuing factor of intelligence, lifetime after lifetime. Like you go look at the kind of Upanishads and whatnot, and certain Puranas and whatnot, and you see there's like there's they talk about this one great sage who had lived 7,500 apocalypses, 7,500 7,500 apocalypses. Like, think about that. Apocalypses, like that could be eons. That could be like, incredibly long. So they had even that notion that the person incarnated that much. Okay. Now, me personally, Mr. Within's view is, I I don't let language be an imposter, from my direct experience. Not an imposter, but you know what I mean. Like, for me, thoughts cannot be the world too much, because they change. Anything that tries to touch the world, it changes. So anyways, this continuity of a sort of consciousness after lifetime, it was as if, regardless of, it was as if like the same soul incarnating, like in different lives, da 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 da. I'm having too many ideas. What's interesting is that for me personally, um, ideas are not words, they're images. Even words are symbolic for images. And any person who truly wants to comprehend a language, for example, the dictionary, you're going to begin to realize there's a sort of multidimensionality at work in language. That means one word can have many dimensions. So one symbol can have various ways it can exist. So in some sense, if we play along with the linguistic realm, in some sense, we are an individual that could be anything. You can do anything. Everything's possible. And it's like, of course, from the beginning, everything was possible. You know, and when I say everything is possible, that means there was something here. And this intelligence that is now our eyes, there's something profound to it. Our cells, our atoms, are in some sense stardust. That means in some sense, we are the cosmos right now. The carbon in our body is the same carbon in the universe. Elementally, we are at ultimate union with existence. But when we come to subjectively, that's the thing. That's like kind of what I'm trying to pilot people's attention into, a new relationship, that before you go into believing anything, first study your relationship with language, because then you will be pulled towards the history of knowledge. Then you will seek the edge of knowledge. And once you reach the edge of knowledge, you realize the unknown is the ultimate teacher. That means Mr. Within is saying, bow to no one. There are no gurus on this planet. The only guru is the unknown. It's the next way your moment's gonna happen. You know. That means I remember I went to so I was born in Iran, and in 2016 I visited. Like I don't visit there often. I live in Canada, but I visited Iran, and there was this sort of underground gathering of kind of esoteric talks and whatnot, and it was the theme was the soul, you know. It was kind of like a satsang, Persian version of a satsang. Everybody was wearing suits though, and so there's this gathering in this basement, not basement, like you know what I mean, like some lower floor of the building, and in this kind of lounge, big lounge. And anyways, I'm there, and suddenly I had no intention to speak, nothing, no intention. Like literally, I was just there to see what people are gonna say. And then suddenly there came this situation where I was kind of forced to speak because there would be a sort of rudeness, you know, if I didn't. But anyways, like so I go and speak, and so the guy looks at me, you know, and the guy says, "You have 8 minutes. You have 8 minutes." Sorry, he says you have 10 minutes, and so I finished the talk in eight. And the recording's actually there. It's in a different language, but it's uh, number 438, I think. Anyways, so I go there, and I'm not gonna kind of some like one thing I said that I want to kind of bring up is that in that 8 minutes there was a moment where first of all, before I spoke, a lot of people came, and first of all, few of them actually talked about the soul. They all related the soul to some sort of like other teachings and whatnot. And and every person that would come up, the way they would introduce is like they would come up and say, I am like the master of this, I am the master of this, ostad that. That's the Persian word for master or something. And I was like, what is going on here, you know? And so when it came my turn to speak, I suddenly said something which was, I felt it was necessary in that moment. I said that the whole purpose, first of all, I explained to them the word yoga, which means union. And then, in some sense, I told them the whole purpose of the external guru is to reflect to the disciple their inner guru. Because if you follow the inner guru, you add the outer guru, you're going to be following some random person, you know? But the inner guru is a sort of rekindling of your own independence, because most people want something from the world, or they want the world to happen in a certain way. Mr. Within's argument to world peace, and not just world peace, like an efficient civilization, just to see how it would look like. Like the argument is simply that, in some sense, the what if factor. That means we're temporary beings. We cannot avoid it. Of course, we can go and fit into a society, or we can redesign the society. In every moment in history, there has been great movements. When the people's attention is scattered in technological boxes, then there comes the lack of life. It's as if life is alive, but it's not active. People are still, they're caught in their personal dimension. Imagine you lived a lifetime for yourself, and then the next lifetime you're like, okay, I'm bored. How long should I just live for myself? So you see, it's this notion that the evolution of responsibility of how experience and existence are moving at the same time. So Mr. Within's kind of, what I'm telling people is study your attention. It is something your teachers never told you. The only thing your teachers told you was pay attention. You know, you had to pay attention. You had to pay the educational system so you could have attention. You know, but what I'm saying is that you have the child evolves into the student that learns from the outer teacher. Eventually the child will realize the outer teacher's teachings are its own mind. Sometimes what you find magnificent outside of yourself, when you see a beautiful sunset, some person could have seen that sunset every day and been like, boring, man, boring. You know, I've seen this so much, but but you see, for example, someone who hasn't seen that scenery before suddenly gets fascinated, as if the image enters their intelligence, like their awareness, their sphere of awareness, and the being is changed by the data. This is why I have a view that intelligence is sculpting itself based on how alive it is. See, the technological kind of revolution has brought us to a situation where a lot of things that we should have naturally evolved towards, we technologically replaced. Rather than meeting up to the level of the evolutionary challenge, we in some sense reduce the challenge by creating technological things. So we have in some sense brought a sort of strange, not complete, but stasis to, like an incomplete stasis some of evolutionary, of the biological evolutionary process. That means more and more the child is forgetting the greenness of the trees. More and more people are being drawn towards, like, I remember I saw this like sci-fi artwork from this artist. It was so profound. I've never seen something as profound as that. In that artwork, there was this kid who had this virtual reality headset, and the kid was on the side drooling as if it's a child who shouldn't have put on the virtual reality headset, but because it did, the child forgot to take it off, and the parents weren't there, so the child was stuck there in that virtual reality. So it was a crazy image, you know, but when I saw that, I saw, wow, what was the technology we created before virtual reality? It was language. And Mr. Within telling a species to step beyond the linguistic simulation is like me telling people what you know is not what you know. So it will be a chaotic kind of uh, wave, what I'm saying. But at the same time, the caveman took sticks and a rock and somehow made fire. Like, we can definitely, our species has potential to survive. You know? It's just that I personally find that there's a collective reason. That means there's an individual purpose to existence, which is whatever way you like life to be animated, but then there's a collective purpose. This collective purpose is just how far the awareness can value itself and decide. There's this incredible poet, ancient Persian poet, not ancient, but like Persian poet from 700 years ago. He says, he has this incredible, like, poetic passage, which I remember right now. I'll tell you. So his name is Jalaluddin Molana Rumi. And Rumi says, I was mineral, I died, and I became a plant. I died, oh no, sorry, I'll say it again. I died as a mineral, and I became a plant. He's speaking about the evolution of his being. He says, I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I became man. And then he says, why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? I shall die once more as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on, to be what no mind has ever conceived. And that's the uniqueness. That's the playing field. The edge, the vanishing point of the subjective realm, which is holding the projection of the meaning of the objective. Rumi has this other poetic imagery where he says, chaos and order are like wings of a bird. You know, good and evil are like wings of a bird. The bird needs both wings to fly. So the mind requires chaos and order to be a character in a story, to be a journeyer. We need the change. It's like as if, imagine if all of life was just a painting. You know what I mean? So there's an animation to it. There's an incredible 3D depth to it. You know. There's the Zen story where in the Zen story there is a man who's sitting alone on a sunny day, on a very beautiful day, on this grassland. And he suddenly just becomes still and silent, closes his eyes, and just experiences how the moment is. And suddenly, as the Zen story says, he suddenly attains a sort of enlightening vision. He suddenly realizes something about the true nature of the world. Now, the Zen story continues and says there was a minion, a dark minion, in another dimension that suddenly sees this. This dark minion suddenly sees this person has become aware of the secret nature of has kind of like his eyes have opened up more to the true nature of the world. And so this dark minion suddenly sees this and runs to the Dark Lord and tells the Dark Lord, and the Dark Lord comes up and says, what? And the minion says, Dark Lord, this man has just realized a truth to the nature of the world. What should we do? And in that moment, the Dark Lord says, don't worry, don't worry. Don't worry about it, because this person, who regardless of his enlightening gaze, will make a belief out of it. And it is in some sense how language is pulling experience into linguistic containment. Uh, in, I can't. It's like language, beliefs. Do not hold a painting in front of yourself and tell yourself that you're living life. Language is important, it's a technology, but it's as if like a person going inside a car, driving with it, and then suddenly forgetting that they're a person out, that they can leave the car. So similarly, it's like an attention that has, in some sense, has been devoured by the ideological axiom by any ideology there's a way we can in some sense analyze it, and it's based on how much the ideology allows the human attention to be on the unknown or the known. Behind your eyes, a free moment resides. A moment so free that purity could not have a definition. The instantaneity of intelligence will astonish you. Light is being your mind right now. The sensory data is being the moment. You see? The presence beyond the personality means a sort of attributeless unified presence regardless of the dualistic frame. That means you can rest because good and bad are just two sides of two wings of the plane of existence. The pilot of consciousness navigates as the whole plane of existence. A mind that animates itself is evidence of the intelligence found in the universal sector. We are either particles in space or intelligent space in particles as waves. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he says, when I see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I see that I am everything, that is love. And in between, my life moves. His attention in the moment oscillates between being everything and nothing, and in some sense the shift of in some sense wisdom and love. Wisdom is an acknowledgement of emptiness. Love is the fullest potential of the reality. And the fullest potential of the reality, when you love something, you're devoting your full attention to it. You see? So in some sense, whatever is taking your attention is the God of your moment. You know? Hidden underneath the selfish intentions of individuals who, out of panic of their temporary nature, are fighting to survive, there is an underlying kind of intelligence where this intelligence has no conceptual owner. It's beyond the language threshold. Once you kind of reach this, it is kind of very playfully, like somebody could touch it and under could tap you on the shoulder. What that means is your attention in the recognition, like your attention is realizing that it is conscious existence. Your consciousness is existing, and your existence is in the attention. This brings an incredible bliss because it shows you the full picture. There's a sort of, and this bliss is, the yogis said it's like some divine bliss. Let me tell you what that bliss is. That bliss is a reversion. It's like the drop falling into the ocean before it dies. It's kind of like a human being realizing the collective presence of everything. We should not worship ideas. Just like we stopped worshiping idols, idea worship should stop. What if idea worship stops? What is left? In some sense, where up ideas can lead. That means man is in this search for truth, and he's constantly, whatever's coming in his attention is he's reflectively thinking that's the truth. You know, wherever the attention goes, the world bows to. Your world personally bows to. Before I end off, guys, the whole point of me bringing this whole collective context to things is not to uh, validate like kumbaya oneness kind of events. What I'm trying to say is there was this poet by the name of Attar, and this is the last story I'm going to share. Attar, this Sufi mystic poet, like a rare mind on this planet. He 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 has this writing in his writings, like the main title, not main title, but like one of his major work is called The Conference of the Birds, and it's the idea of phoenix in some sense for Persian mythological kind of ideology, you know. All the birds in the world gather together. They have all heard of this myth of the phoenix. So all the birds in the world fly in the same, come together and they start flying. They start flying in search of the phoenix. They fly so long that eventually groups and groups of the birds are getting tired and they're stopping their search for this ultimate bird called the phoenix. Eventually, at the end of it, there is 30. There is 30 birds left. And there's significance to that. These 30 birds, in Farsi, by the way, Seymour is the name for phoenix, which means 30 birds. So, anyways, these 30 birds that are there, that are left, they have endless effort. They have this extreme determination that they have surpassed the realities of any other bird in their kind of like universal sector. So what happens is that suddenly these 30 birds realize there is no such thing as the phoenix, they are the phoenix. And so that's the profound notion of it. These 30 birds were the phoenix. In some sense, 8 billion human beings are the true presence of humanity. Live in a world that you dare to live in the world that you get to experience every day, like every day happens once. Dare to live in the world that you are in once. There's no other time. There's no other existential allowance. The moment is, it's like the best time to start something is always now. Live for life, and you'll live for life. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Every moment is significant. Much blessings and namaste.